Welcome back to the deep dive. You know, we all crave that deep understanding, right? That ability to really grasp something without wading through a ton of information. Well, today we're diving into some of the most influential books ever written. We're talking about those works that have truly shaped thought and culture across the globe.
And we're basing our exploration on a fascinating list compiled by Dr. Jesvant Rathard.
Now, this isn't just some random top 10 list you might find online. Dr. Rathod used some pretty rigorous criteria.
Absolutely. We're talking massive sales figures, of course, but it goes way beyond that. He looked at the cultural impact of these books, how widely they've been translated.
Oh, and their enduring popularity too, right? Like how often they're checked out from libraries, how much they're still discussed and debated.
Exactly. This list represents a kind of collective global consciousness. It's about books that have resonated across borders and generations.
What's really striking to me is the sheer scope of this list. It's not just one type of book or one genre.
You're right. We're talking religious texts that form the bedrock of entire faiths. We have those groundbreaking novels that essentially invented new ways of storytelling.
And then there are works of nonfiction that have challenged our understanding of the world
Yeah.
and pushed us to think in new ways. Truly a global conversation.
Our mission today is to really zoom in on some of these giants of literature. We're going to pull out the key insights.
The surprising nuggets that illuminate why these books continue to matter so much. We're going to give you a shortcut to understanding these cultural touchstones without having to read all of them this week.
Sounds like a plan.
So let's start with the foundational texts, the ones that have shaped the beliefs and values of billions. We've got to start with the Bible.
Absolutely. The Bible, in many ways, is the starting point for so much of Western culture and beyond. What's immediately fascinating about it is that it wasn't written by one person.
Yeah, it's more like an anthology, right?
Precisely. It's a collection of writings compiled over centuries, primarily across the Middle East. You have different voices, different genres, different historical contexts, all woven together.
And it really is this sweeping narrative, right? The Old Testament takes us from those creation myths in Genesis to the laws and covenants outlined in books like Exodus and Leviticus.
Right, you have the historical accounts of the ancient Israelites, those stories of kings and prophets.
And then you have the poetic beauty of the Psalms and the powerful pronouncements of those prophets like Isaiah and Jeremiah. It's a vast tapestry.
Then, of course, the New Testament comes along and shifts the focus quite dramatically. We move to the life and teachings of Jesus Christ.
Told through those four Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, each one offering a slightly different perspective on his ministry and message.
Then you have the letters, or epistles, written by early Christian leaders like Paul, which were absolutely crucial in shaping Christian theology.
And then there's that book that has always fascinated and perplexed people, the book of Revelation, full of symbolism and imagery.
What's incredible about the Bible is that it's not just a religious text. Its influence has permeated so many aspects of society, from art and music to law and ethics. Think about the Ten Commandments and how those have informed legal codes, or the endless artistic interpretations of biblical stories, from Michelangelo's Sistine Chapel ceiling to countless works of literature and music.
It's impossible to overstate its impact. It's like this cultural DNA that runs through so much of what we understand about ourselves and the world.
Now, from that major influence in the Abrahamic tradition, we move to another global pillar, the Quran.
The Quran, the central text of Islam. And this one, as I understand it, is quite different in its origins. It's believed to be the direct revelation of God to the Prophet Muhammad.
Yes, in the 7th century in Arabia, Muslims believe that the angel Gabriel revealed these verses to Muhammad over a period of about 23 years.
And the structure is different too, right? It's not a linear narrative like the Bible.
Right. The Quran is organized into 114 chapters, or surahs, and each surah addresses a variety of topics. You have theological principles, moral and ethical guidelines.
Even legal frameworks for society and guidance for both personal and communal life.
Exactly. You find it all woven together.
I know that some of the key recurring themes are the oneness of God, that core monotheism.
Right. And a strong emphasis on justice, on compassion for those less fortunate.
And of course, the concept of accountability in the afterlife.
Now, what's interesting is that when you look at the Quran in relation to the Bible, you see some shared prophetic figures. You have Abraham, Moses, Jesus. But the Quran often presents different interpretations of their stories. It highlights the diverse ways these foundational narratives have been understood across different faiths.
It's fascinating how these two texts, both so deeply influential, offer different perspectives on those shared figures. And speaking of different perspectives, let's shift gears a bit and talk about those early pillars of narrative, those stories that many consider to be the forerunners of the modern novel.
Perfect segue. Let's start with Don Quixote, Miguel de Cervantes' masterpiece, published in two parts in the early 17th century.
A Spanish novel, right?
That's right. And it's often cited as a pivotal moment in the evolution of the novel. It really marked a departure from the romances and chivalric tales that were popular at the time.
I remember reading about the main character, Alonso Quijano. He's this guy who's so obsessed with reading those stories of knights errant that he actually believes he's a knight himself.
He's completely lost in those chivalric romances. He even comes up with a new name for himself, Don Quixote de la Mancha, and he sets out on all these comical adventures with his faithful squire, Sancho Panza.
Tilting at windmills, thinking they're giants, mistaking inns for grand castles. It's those iconic scenes that everyone remembers.
And it's hilarious. But there's also a deeper layer to it. Cervantes is using humor to satirize those outdated ideals of chivalry. He's poking fun at the disconnect between Don Quixote's romanticized worldview and the often mundane reality.
It makes you think about the power of belief, how our perceptions shape our reality. And there's also kind of melancholy to it. You can't help but feel for Don Quixote, lost in his fantasies.
What's really innovative about Don Quixote is the depth of characterization. We get inside Don Quixote's head. We understand his motivations, his delusions, and Sancho Panza, too. He's not just a sidekick. He's a fully realized character with his own thoughts and desires.
And that focus on the inner lives of characters is something that really marks the transition to the modern novel. Now, while Don Quixote is often hailed as the first modern novel in the West, there's a compelling case to be made for a much earlier work from the East, The Tale of Genji.
Oh, absolutely. This one predates Don Quixote by centuries, written by a Japanese noblewoman, Murasaki Shikibu, in the early 11th century.
So we're talking about a world away from the dusty plains of Spain.
Right. The Tale of Genji is set in the Heian court of Japan, a very refined, very aesthetically driven world, and it's all about the life and loves of this nobleman, Hikaru Genji.
He sounds like quite the character.
He is. He's a complex, flawed figure. He's known for his beauty, his charm, his romantic entanglements. The book delves into the intricacies of court life, the social customs, the political maneuvering.
The list really emphasizes the rich poetry and psychological depth of this work. It sounds like a much more introspective, more internal kind of storytelling compared to Don Quixote's outward adventures.
Absolutely. The Tale of Genji explores themes of love, loss, beauty, the fleeting nature of life, and the poetry that's woven throughout the narrative adds another layer of emotional resonance. It's a masterpiece of Japanese literature.
So here we have these two groundbreaking works, Don Quixote and The Tale of Genji, emerging from vastly different cultures, centuries apart, yet both pushing the boundaries of storytelling in their own unique ways.
It really speaks to the universality of certain themes, doesn't it? That desire to explore the human condition, to understand our motivations, our desires.
Now, from these foundational narratives, let's move on to some epic tales. Stories that often explore those grander themes of good versus evil, of fate and destiny. First up, a book that needs no introduction, The Lord of the Rings.
Oh, a true behemoth of fantasy literature. And its impact is undeniable. Tolkien created not just a story, but an entire world. Middle-earth, with its own languages, its own histories, its own myths.
For anyone who might not be familiar, it tells the story of Frodo Baggins. He's a hobbit.
Right, those small, peaceful creatures who live in the Shire.
And Frodo is tasked with this incredibly dangerous quest to destroy the One Ring, this powerful artifact forged by the Dark Lord Sauron.
The fate of Middle-earth hangs in the balance.
He's joined by this fellowship of companions, and their journey is full of peril. They encounter orcs, goblins, all sorts of terrifying creatures.
But they also encounter incredible beauty and moments of true fellowship and sacrifice.
Those are the themes that really resonate, aren't they? The power of friendship, the courage to face down evil.
Absolutely. And Tolkien's intricate world building, that's another key element. He created this incredibly detailed history and mythology for Middle-earth.
It's what draws readers in. You feel like you're stepping into a fully realized world.
Now, from the intricate world of Middle-earth, let's travel to the ancient epics of India. And there are two that we need to talk about, the Mahabharata and the Ramayana. Let's start with the Mahabharata.
This one is truly epic in scope. It's actually one of the longest poems ever written, compiled over centuries in ancient India.
It's this vast tapestry of interconnected stories centered around the conflict between two branches of a royal family, the Pandavas and the Kauravas.
Leading to the Kurukshetra War, right?
Exactly. This massive battle that determines the fate of their kingdom. But the Mahabharata is so much more than just a war story.
Oh, it's deeply embedded in Hindu philosophy and culture.
Yes, it explores those profound questions of duty, of righteousness, of the nature of reality itself.
And there's one section in particular that stands out, the Bhagavad Gita.
Right, that's essentially a philosophical dialogue between Prince Arjuna, one of the Pandava brothers, and Lord Krishna.
Who is an avatar of Vishnu, one of the major deities in Hinduism.
Exactly. And this dialogue takes place right before the battle. Arjuna is filled with doubt. He doesn't want to fight against his own family.
So it becomes this exploration of moral dilemmas, of the conflict between duty and personal feelings.
And it's become a central text in Hinduism. It's read and studied for its wisdom on ethics, on spiritual growth.
So the Mahabharata, it's not just about heroes and villains, battles and conquests. It's about those eternal questions that we all grapple with.
Now, alongside the Mahabharata, we have the Ramayana, another foundational epic of ancient India.
This one focuses on Prince Rama and his quest to rescue his wife Sita.
Who's been abducted by Ravana, the demon king of Lanka.
Rama is often seen as this embodiment of dharma, of righteousness, of ideal virtue.
He's the perfect hero. He's exiled from his kingdom, but he never wavers in his duty. He remains devoted to his wife, to his people.
And he eventually defeats Ravana, restoring order and righteousness.
And along the way, he's aided by his loyal brother, Lakshmana, and the monkey god, Hanuman, who is this incredibly devoted and powerful figure.
The themes of loyalty, honor, the triumph of good over evil, they're all very prominent in the Ramayana.
Absolutely. And like the Mahabharata, the Ramayana has been a source of moral and ethical guidance for centuries.
It's been adapted into countless plays and dances. It's part of the cultural fabric of South Asia.
Now let's move into more modern literary landscapes and explore how authors have reflected on society, on the individual. Let's start with Things Fall Apart, Chinua Achebe's powerful novel.
This is a book that really opened my eyes to the complexities of colonialism. It's set in Nigeria, right?
Right, and it's considered one of the foundational works of modern African literature, published in 1958.
So right around the time that many African nations were gaining independence.
Exactly, it was a time of immense change, and Achebe's novel captures that sense of upheaval.
It tells the story of Okonkwo, who's a respected leader in his Igbo community.
A strong, proud man. But he's also very much a product of his culture, with its own traditions, its own values.
And then the British colonialists arrive, and they bring with them their own ways of doing things.
Their own laws, their own religion, and it creates this clash of cultures.
A clash that has devastating consequences for Okonkwo and his community.
It's a story of loss, of displacement, but it's also a celebration of Igbo culture. Achebe portrays the richness of their traditions, their beliefs, their social structures.
It's a book that everyone should read. It challenges us to see the world from a different perspective.
Now, from the world of Things Fall Apart, let's travel to Colombia, to the magical realism of Gabriel Garcia Marquez.
100 Years of Solitude. I remember starting that book and feeling like I'd stepped into a dream.
It's a truly unique reading experience, published in 1967, and it really put Latin American literature on the map.
It's a multi-generational saga, right? Following the Buendia family?
Yes, over 7 generations, and it's all set in this mythical town called Macondo.
And it's full of these incredible events, both magical and mundane. I remember reading about a rain of yellow flowers that lasts for days.
Right, and characters who live for over a century, a woman who ascends into heaven while doing laundry. But those magical elements are interwoven with very real historical events.
Wars, revolutions, political corruption, it all blends together seamlessly.
It's classic magical realism, and through it all, Marquez explores those grand themes: love, loss, the cyclical nature of time, the weight of history.
It's a book that stays with you long after you finish it. And finally, in this section, we come to an American classic, To Kill a Mockingbird, by Harper Lee.
Published in 1960.
Yeah.
And it immediately became a sensation. It won the Pulitzer Prize, and it's never gone out of print.
And it continues to be relevant, even though it's set in the 1930s during the Jim Crow era in the American South.
It tackles those really difficult issues of racial injustice and prejudice.
But it does so through the eyes of a child, Scout Finch.
Right. It's her voice that we hear, and it's
Well,
that innocent, unfiltered perspective that makes the story so powerful.
Scout's father, Atticus, is a lawyer, and he agrees to defend Tom Robinson, a black man who's been falsely accused of assaulting a white woman.
It's a case he knows he can't win, but he does it anyway because it's the right thing to do.
Atticus becomes this moral compass in the story, a symbol of integrity and courage.
And the story unfolds in this small town in Alabama, Maycomb. And Lee captures the complexities of that society so well. The racism, the gossip, the small-minded prejudices.
It's a coming-of-age story for Scout, but it's also a story about the power of empathy, about standing up for what's right, even when it's difficult.
And those themes continue to resonate today. That's why it's still read and discussed in classrooms. It sparks important conversations about social justice, about racial equality.
Well, this has been an incredible journey. We've only just touched on a handful of the books on Dr. Rathard's list. But it's clear that these books, these stories, they're more than just entertainment.
They're reflections of the human experience. They explore those universal themes that connect us across cultures and across time.
And they provide this lens for understanding different historical contexts, the different ways of seeing the world.
Hopefully, this deep dive has sparked your own curiosity. Maybe you'll revisit some of these books. Maybe you'll discover new ones.
So, as we wrap up, I want you to think about this. Looking at the enduring popularity of these books, the themes they explore, what aspects of the human experience do you believe truly transcend time and place?
And thinking about the criteria we've discussed, cultural impact, lasting appeal, translation, what other books do you think deserve a place on a list of the most influential works?
It's a question worth pondering. Keep exploring, keep reading, and keep diving deep.